In this video, we want to look at some organic examples of some reaction problems. So on the computer, you're not going to be able to write structures the same way you would for the practice problems. In fact, there's no really good way within the testing software to have you actually write out structures to answer reaction-based questions because it just doesn't allow you to draw any structures. So because of that, I wanted to go through a couple of example questions that show you how the question is going to be asked, being you're not able to draw structures to make sure you're able to still do these correctly. So here's how generally the problems read for reactions. So it's for each of the following reactions, write the name of the functional group as well as the correct name for the organic molecule that should appear where the question mark is. Remember, you must correctly name the functional group as well as name the structure for each question mark that appears. Now, ordinarily, when you would see one of these types of problems on the practice problems that I have posted, you would just write the structure. Well, Canvas won't allow you to write the structure, so we have to ask this question a different way. Even though we're asking the question a different way, you still want to start off on your scratch paper by writing the correct structure for where that question mark goes. So that's how we're going to begin this one as well. So whenever you're looking at reactions, what you really want to do is you want to identify what type of functional groups do you have and what type of transformations are going to occur. Well, if we look at what we're starting with, on the left, we notice we have an alcohol. Not only do we have an alcohol, we can identify it further as a secondary alcohol. So what this problem is really asking is, okay, we have a secondary alcohol. What are we trying to do to this secondary alcohol? We're trying to oxidize a secondary alcohol. So what do you get when you oxidize a secondary alcohol? Well, when you oxidize a secondary alcohol, what do you end up forming? Well, secondary alcohols will get oxidized to form ketones. So now what we want to do is on our scratch paper, you want to go through this procedure and then draw out the structure of the ketone that you're going to form from this. So remember that only changes are happening at the functional group end of the molecule. So if I box a functional group end in purple, that's the part of the molecule that's going to change. So that secondary alcohol is going to form a ketone. So what am I going to do? I'm going to get my ketone in place. C double bond O, that's what makes a ketone a ketone. That's my change that is actually happening here. If I kind of map out what's becoming what, in purple, we have the secondary alcohol forming a ketone. Now it's just a matter of identifying and keeping the correct connections in place for what I have attached. Well, everything outside of the functional group on a molecule has to remain unchanged. Well, in order for that to remain unchanged, I just have to keep the same connections. So that carbon that is in the purple box, what do I have bonded to it? Well, on one side of it, I have a CH3, so I need to keep that connection. So I'm going to get my CH3 in there. What do I have also attached to that carbon of the functional group? Well, on the left-hand side, you can see I have a CH2. That's not part of the functional group. I just need to leave that unchanged. What do I have connected to that CH2? Well, if I kind of go over another, I have a carbon. What's connected to that carbon? Well, I have a CH3, a CH3, and another CH3. So on your scrap paper, you're going to write out the structure that corresponds. That secondary alcohol that we started with is going to form that ketone. Notice how just the functional group end of the molecule changed. Everything else stayed the same. Now you're not able to write this or show this in Canvas, but this is what you want to do on your scrap paper. after you have successfully written out the structure, then it's a matter of time. Then it's just a matter of answering the questions that are asked. So we wrote down what that question mark structure is. That's the ketone that we wrote. So now to get at the question, for each of the following reactions, write the name of the functional group as well as the correct name for the organic molecule that should appear where the question mark is. Well, we wrote the structure. Now let's just answer the question that Canvas asks. So in Canvas, what you're actually going to type into Canvas in terms of taking this exam is going to be the answers to those questions. Well, we want the name as well as the functional group. Well, so in green, I'm putting in what you're typing into Canvas. Well, the functional group we already identified as a ketone. Now, what name do you have for this? Well, it's a ketone. So how do we name the structure that we wrote for ourselves? Well, it's a ketone, so we're going to get that A-N-O-N-E ending. Ketones all have that unknown ending. The next part is we have to look at how many carbons are part of that longest continuous carbon chain. So if we trace those out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the prefix for 5 is pent. So we would get that in there as part of the name. Next we have some branches. If I circle the branches in blue, I have a branch here and a branch here. What do we know about those branches? Well, what we know about those branches is that they're each single carbon branches. So they're methyl branches, but I have 2 of them. So that would make this dimethyl. The last part is we would have to number the carbon chain. So if I kind of get rid of some of our little highlighting and drawing here, now we would number the carbon chain to decide which numbering system we would want to use, going left to right or right to left. Well, in purple, we'll number going left to right. We could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or going the opposite way, do this in green, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Which numbering system will we have to use? Well, it'll be the one that has the functional group at the lowest possible number. So in the purple, the functional group would be at position 4. In green, the functional group would be in position 2. So I need to use the green numbering system. So now using that green numbering system, what do I have? Well, I have both branches at position 4. So I would have 4, 4 dimethyl. And then where's the functional group at? The ketone's at position 2. So I would have 4, 4 dimethyl 2-pentanone as my name. So on your scrap paper, you're going to be writing out the structures for yourselves. Then what you're entering into Canvas is what's circled in green right here, the functional group and then the name of the molecule. So I wanted you to see this type of question so you're ready for it come the exam, because you're not able to show structures on the exam. You need to first write the structure for yourself and then identify the functional groups and correctly name that molecule. Here is another example of that same sort of question where you can't just draw the structure because Canvas doesn't give you the tools in order to show the structure on the exam. So this is the same process of, on your scrap paper, you're going to draw out the structure that you want, then correctly name it and write the functional group. So this one says the same sort of wording. For each of the following reactions, write the name of the functional group as well as the correct name for the organic molecule that should appear where the question mark is. Remember, you must correctly name the functional group as well as name the structure for each question mark that appears. So same process here. We want to write out the structure on our scrap paper, and then in Canvas we would type in the pertinent information regarding that structure. So we want to try to figure out what structure will go where this question mark is in order to successfully complete this reaction. Well, functional groups are all about, reactions are all about functional group transformation. So we want to identify what functional groups do we have. Well, on the left-hand side, we recognize that we have an alcohol. And we're reacting it with something, that's the question mark. And what do we produce? So on the right-hand side, what sort of functional group do we have? Well, this functional group is an ester. So an alcohol plus what makes an ester? Well, that missing piece that we're trying to figure out, we recognize that in order to make an ester, we need an alcohol and a carboxylic acid. So we need a carboxylic acid here in order to correctly get the right structure. Our missing piece is a carboxylic acid. How are we going to determine the structure of that carboxylic acid that forms? Well, just like we do for any other ester, we're going to kind of split this down into its very pieces. Remember what the key bond is for every single ester. The key bond for an ester is between the C double bond O and that C single bond O. That's what splits it into the two parts. The part on the right-hand side that has the oxygen in it, remember that originally came from the alcohol. That's the alcohol side of the molecule. The part with the C double bond O, remember that is what came from the carboxylic acid. So now we can kind of map things on. We know we're forming a carboxylic acid, or we know our missing piece is a carboxylic acid. So let's get that carboxylic acid piece in there. We know what carboxylic acids look like: C double bond O, single bond, OH. Now here's where you're kind of recognizing where your pieces came from. This C double bond O of the carboxylic acid ends up forming the C double bond O of the ester. So what do I have attached to it? Well, if I just kind of look over, I'll highlight this in purple. What do I have next to it? Well, I have a CH2 next to it. So that means my structure of my carboxylic acid needs to have a CH2. What's next to that CH2? What's connected to it? Well, what's connected to that CH2 is a CH3. So I need to have a CH3 connected to that CH2. So now we have successfully drawn out on your scrap paper the structure for that carboxylic acid that we would need in order to make this specific ester. Now remember, you can't draw the structure in Canvas. So what is the question in Canvas asking? Well, you need to name the functional group and name the molecule that you drew. Well, the functional group we already identified as a carboxylic acid. So we can get that in there. We have a carboxylic acid. Then it asks for the correct name of the structure. So what is the name of that structure that we wrote? Well, it's a carboxylic acid, so if we name it, we would have that acid ending for it, and that would be enoic, and then acid as a separate word. Then we would ask ourselves, how many carbons are in this longest continuous carbon chain? There are 3. So being there are 3 carbons, the prefix for 3 is prop. So this is propanoic acid for our name. So your answer that you're typing in for Canvas is the functional group carboxylic acid, and then naming the molecule, which is propanoic acid. So even though you're doing a lot of work on your scrap paper in terms of writing the structure, getting the right bond connectivities set up and done, what you're really entering in for Canvas is answering the question. Based upon that correct structure that you wrote for the question mark, what is the functional group and what is the name? And what's written in green is what you would be typing in Canvas.